Sir.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Josh. It's kind of hard to follow, after silly putty. Except maybe to, make a long link, maybe some of the brains of my students are like silly putty by the time I'm done with them. I want to preface this talk by saying, first and foremost, that I don't have any idea what innovation is. I've heard it used everywhere to describe everything. I have no idea what it means any longer. To me, innovation may be the result of solving for more things than you were asked to solve when you were given a problem. And the only way that I know how to do that is to get as many smart people into the room as possible and get out of the way. Which also suggests, or for me at least, also means that I don't really exactly know what collaboration is. Insofar as all I really need to know or to try to understand is who's going to be in that room and how are they going to work together. So when I say collaborative innovation, or when I hear collaborative innovation, what I think is interdisciplinary design. And that's what I teach. I teach that at the Rhode Island School of Design, where I run a studio, a design studio called the Innovation Studio, which brings together students from architecture, landscape architecture, industrial design. Sometimes we get sculptors, sometimes we get graphic designers. This year I was shooting for and hoping for an illustration major to work on a power plant sort of project. There was something else to draw, I guess. But I get these great groups of kids from a wide variety of disciplines to work on large-scale environmental and infrastructure projects. So I bring them in and ask them to think about landfills. I bring them in and ask them to think about electronic or electric power plants. I bring them in and ask them to think about eco-industrial parks, kind of closed-loop manufacturing, or watersheds. How do you think like a watershed? But I don't want to talk about the studio so much as I'd like to talk about the experience of interdisciplinary innovation or interdisciplinary collaboration, because I worry about what innovation is. I worry about what innovation initiatives are. Building a better mousetrap, or figuring out how to produce the mousetrap better, or bringing value to the people who are having trouble with mice, right? I fear that these kinds of concerns with immediate results tend to conceal the important part of innovation, which is the need or the requirement for a kind of a rigorous and repeatable process, and also the long-term impact that an experience like that has on the people who go through it. So, and I think that, innovation, collaboration makes for better problems, better solutions. And I think that the experience of going through that turns people into much more entrepreneurial and more proactive kinds of problem solvers. To explain why I think that, I've got to tell you a little bit about the studio. First, for those of you who are unfamiliar with design education, let me kind of point out that when I say the studio, I'm talking about, at least in RISD's case, I see my students from 9 in the morning until 6 at night. One semester they might be designing the interior of a helicopter. The next they might be trying to figure out the best shape for an office. They might be working on a garden. And in most of those studio offerings that they take, they have the option, or when they make the selection, the program, that is what they're assigned to do, is delivered to them in a paper that says, my office needs to be 750 square feet, and it might need 2 windows, and it would be good to have some lights. Make it so. My studio doesn't work that way. We tend to look at problems that need to be defined in order to be solved. We deal with very complicated and open-ended issues, the kind you all deal with every day, right? The kind that all of us deal with every day in our lives, in our work as policymakers, in our work as business people, industrialists, or designers for that matter. In order to site a power plant, for example, what do you have to do, right? You've got to think about what kind of fuel is going to be the most efficient. You have to think about what are the kinds of regulatory environments that are going to affect what you can produce and limit what you can do. And you've got to think about what happens in the neighborhoods. right? You've got to figure out how to turn a no into a yes. And that's sometimes the most important thing that you could possibly do. In that sense, the problems that I'm offering my students, or that I'm asking my students to look at, are wicked problems, right? In that they do not admit an easy answer or a simple, singular solution. Viewed in this way, the studio, I would say, is foremost an exercise in problem framing. And framing is different than problem solving because you have to ask questions. You have to say, what are the emergent conditions? What do I understand is happening out in the world that could affect my ability to implement an idea? And how is it that things beyond my understanding change the way I think about my ideas? In the studio that I'm going to use as an example today was the studio we did last year where we looked at power production in New York City. The students came up with, at the very beginning of the project, this simple question. They realized, with the help from the Department of Energy, that by 2017, natural gas prices were going to spike, which was going to mean that coal was going to be the next big thing, guaranteed, according to our current forecasts. So that means between now and 2017, from their point of view, there was a limited window to invest in, explore, and try to develop more alternative technologies, alternative fuel sources, before we start to have to deal with kind of coal emissions at a large scale. Thinking about this as a way of thinking about a power plant, I'm going to tell you right now, is going to yield a different kind of solution than the way that an engineer would think about a power plant, at least at first pass, right? Which would be to say, I've got to make it efficient, then I'm going to give it to somebody else. They're going to find out the best place for me to find the infrastructural interconnect so it's going to work. And once we've done that, we'll sell it to the community that it's going to be a great idea. We're asking a very different thing. We're asking, what is the best way to do this in the studio? And in doing that, we're asking, what are the social, environmental, political issues that surround these kinds of technical efficiency questions? We're asking, what are the conditions on the ground that we need to attend to or that we want to respond to, in addition to making sure that we get something that works, that connects well, so that it is a good idea. In the studio this last year, what the students did in their asking what is the best way to, they ended up saying, the question is, what is the best way to balance the city's requirement, internal requirement, to produce 80% of its own power within the 5 boroughs? And can we find a way to balance that with the needs of the residents of each of those boroughs? Can we find a way to make something that is not harming the borough, that is not hurting the resident, that is not blighting the waterfront, but still is able to match that 80% requirement? As I said, this is a pretty different way of thinking about these sorts of problems. And, there we go. One of the ways that I think you frame problems, these kinds of large-scale problems, is to think about all the ways that you could solve it. And to do that, we engage policymakers, we engage environmental advocates, we engage civilians and citizens, we engage bureaucrats, industrialists, and business people. We bring them all into the table at the very beginning of a project, and we ask them what they need. We ask them what the best things that they would want, each of them individually and as a group, so that we're able to begin to see an incredible range of contradictory approaches up front. These approaches might be burn all the municipal waste in New York City. It's a hell of a resource. Or think about alternative technologies that would use the viaduct system that feeds the entire city with water and use that to make electrical power. Or take the advantage of the fact that New York City's got the most plug-in electrical cars anywhere in the country. Use them as a great big battery for the grid. Keep them all in one place. Power them up, power them down when the grid is at high activity or low activity. Now, admittedly, I don't know if you guys are, okay, you're seeing more than I am. Admittedly, having a lot of ideas is really only the first step in defining a problem. Following that first flurry, the studio has to pause to step back and think about the larger trends that they've uncovered within their own ideas in order to develop some way to guide the future development of the project. And to do that, they think about, because we're designers and worried about the public sphere, where they think about urban design, so we make master plans. We think about the technology, so we make kind of master diagrams. And we develop a kind of a manifesto or a set of design criteria upon which any solution can be judged and verified as successful. But to do that, as I say, they've got to step back and say, well, what are the design criteria? These criteria are more than efficiency. These criteria are the things that make our cities great. These criteria are the things that make perhaps our nation great. These criteria are the things that make it possible to live by these places and for them to be an amenity for us. Now, admittedly, from the outside, and the students will be the first ones to tell you as well, from the inside, this is a messy process. Especially at that first brainstorming session where you have no idea where you're going to end up. But in fact, I think that there's the undergirding of this process makes it possible for people to come up with radical new ideas because the process itself is supported in a rigorous and comprehensive way. And this is something that, like I say, I don't know from innovation, but I worry about innovative initiatives or innovation initiatives that overlook that. And it's what I hear from my students when they go out into the world, that there's very little actual appetite for real inquiry, and that it's near impossible for the team members, their alleged team members, to check their egos, their agendas, and their contracts at the door. I think we all know, this is typical of, let me just skip ahead from this one. This is typical of professional practice, right? This is what a multidisciplinary team does. I'm the boss. I'm going to hire Chris. I'm going to hire Saul. I'm going to hire Bob. I'm going to have each one of them do one thing. They don't have to think about anything else. They're going to give it to me. I'm going to gang it together, and there's a solution. Now, if I'm a good architect, I bet you the architectural solution is going to win out. If I'm a good engineer, I bet you the engineering solution is going to win out. I would suggest that these are not the way to solve the kinds of problems that we need to deal with. That is to say, these are not the way to solve complex and wicked problems, a la storm, a la Katrina, a la rising energy prices, a la these kinds of difficult things. Rather, I would suggest that what we need are interdisciplinary teams, in which you get the people that you need to help you solve the problem together in the room, and you get them to work together. You get them all to own the solution. You define that solution together up front. You don't wait until later, or you don't let me do it, because as much as I'd like to do it, I'm probably not going to be that good. In looking at kind of the work that my students are doing now, what I'm heartened by is that of the 76 students who have graduated from the studio in the last 7 years, 52 of them are working on large scale or trying to work on environmental or socially related issues that they believe came out of the studio, that is their calling. Now, on the one hand, we might look at those numbers and say, so what? It's a self-selecting group. They choose, right? But when I think about how much pressure they're under, when I think about what they tell me it's like to be mid-level designers working in industries that don't care about these issues, working for companies that may pay lip service to these issues, and that they are still in the trenches every day trying to fulfill what they think might be the promise of the studio experience that they had, that's pretty profound to me. And it's amazing to me. One of my students is working for a large publicly traded outdoor gear company who has told me yesterday, day before, something like that, that in his current practice, he can afford to do one thing a season. He can try one new thing a season. Maybe he can get the PVC out of all of the stuff that will come out in the spring. Maybe. And this is someone who invented a job for himself when he graduated from college. This is someone who can make the right material choices that will balance economics and environmental questions if he's given the time and the space to do it. And he's not. This, to me, is a problem. but he's in there, he's trying to do it. I would say the next problem for me, or the other thing that is at least as inspiring as the fact that these students are working on the kind of topic area that they thought was important, is that they're hunting, and I'm down to 2 minutes, is that? They're hunting for the ability to experience the kind of interdisciplinary, effective teamwork that they had in the studio, because they recognize inherently that they can get more done, they can handle much more complicated problems, and they can be much more effective if they have a good team. Another one of my grads is working for NASA. She's the designer in an engineering group working on the new space vehicle that she's been working on for 2.5 years. She tells me there are 7 other groups working on the space vehicle, and that the 2.5 years she's been working on that vehicle, they have never talked. No, I think there's something wrong here. And I think, from the outside it seems clear, right? She knows what can be done. She just needs to be allowed to do it. Those teams need to be integrated. What these stories tell to me, or what is vivid to me about these stories that I hear from my students who are out there in the world, is that things we all know sitting in this room, right? Innovation is hard. There's not that much appetite for it. But once you get hooked, you got to keep trying to figure out how to do it. And for me, for me looking at my students, and like you guys, I care about the people I invest in. My turnover rates are probably higher than most of yours. I've got new ones every year. But when I look at these people that I've invested in and seen what they are trying to do, it's clear what is most vivid to me is that they need support. They need a long-term commitment, because the work that they're doing is hard. There's not as much market sector availability for the work that they can do yet. And yet that work is critical. We need that work done. We need to support the people who can do it, and they can. For me, they're my promise, or at least I hope the promise for my daughter, who's 2. And I would say, at best, if we're ready for them and we can make a space for them, they're all of our promise. Thanks.